afternoon. I'm Dr. Julie Myatt, Director of Engage, and it is my great pleasure to introduce you to today's presenter, Dr. Sarah Pierce, Instructor Coordinator in Chemistry and Engage Fellow for the 2025-2026 academic year. Dr. Pierce was on a panel last spring, I believe it was, talking about engaged learning in her classes, and I was so impressed with her work that I invited her to serve as our fellow for this coming year. So I'm delighted that she agreed to that and that she's here to share her excellent teaching practices with you all today.
So I am really going to talk about my journey into active learning. I took my first job in 2008 when I was 20 years old, teaching. And I was kind of my postdoc and had absolutely no teaching experience. And so I was at a small liberal arts university. I flopped into the university. There were no other chemistry faculty there. It was just me. And they said, hey, you get to teach these 3 classes. And I went, oh, okay. And I thought back to how all of my professors taught, and I went to school when they were chalkboards, and they would write on the chalkboard and we would write things down. And so that's what I knew. And so that's how I started teaching. And my students looked more like these students here when I looked out at them. And I became increasingly dissatisfied with that type of basically what I saw through no fault of their own, right? I was just boring. And they were busy and some of them worked nights. And so I really wanted to find active learning that I could do in my classroom. I tried a few things. It just didn't mesh with my personality very well. So I had some failures. And I went to a chemistry education conference in 2012. And I was kind of sitting around talking to people before the symposium got started. And I was kind of bemoaning the fact that my students look like this. And a gentleman said, and I wish I could remember his name, he said, you know, I flipped my class and it really helped. And I was like, well, I've never heard of that. Tell me more. Right? And he said, well, they watch videos before they come in. And then when we come in and we have all this time to do these activities, and I don't feel like I'm losing any time. And I said, oh, I would like to do that, right? Because I want my students to look like this. So I started to research how to flip my class, what that really meant for me. I'm sure most people know what a flipped class is, but just as a fun review, right? A traditional class does a lecture and there's activities you do at home. In a flipped class, they watch part of the lecture at home, and then they do classroom activities. Now, with all of this, right, at the same time, I was getting my master's in education. And so I was really interested in educational theories. And so everybody loves Bloom's taxonomy. And what I knew is that when students were in class and taking notes, that was the easy part of learning, right? That's just remembering, understanding, and all of this. And so what I was doing when students were taking notes in my classroom is we would do the easy part. We would take the notes and then I'd send them home to start working on the problems by themselves. And I firmly believe the hardest thing for students to do is transition from seeing me work problems to working problems on their own. And I was sending them home into the library or wherever they went to do it by themselves. And I just felt like that wasn't super successful. So in the flip model, they do the easy stuff outside of class. And then when they get in class, we can start working those problems and we can apply and analyze. And so that's really the goal and what I wanted. I'm also a big fan of scaffolded learning and Watson's zone of proximal development. And again, students can take notes independently. They can do that all by themselves. What they need assistance with is really starting to work those problems. And so I wanted this to start happening in the classroom so that they could learn from each other and talk about their problems. Now, like any good researcher, I went and looked to see what was going on in the community. So I learned about this first in 2012 and was just really scared, honestly, to kind of implement it. And so I didn't implement it until COVID happened in 2020. This is the way that I did this. So I started looking, and there's 4 publications here that I looked at quite a bit, and people were reporting lower DWF rates. And so if you look at this figure here, right, the flip class is in red, the control class is in blue. And what you see in the control class in blue is pretty much what I had observed. No matter how I teach, 10% of the students are going to do fine. They're going to make A's, right? I could not show up, give 4 tests, and I have 10% of my students that will do just fine. They may complain, but they'll make A's. And then there's always going to be a subset that makes D's and F's, right? There's something going on in their life. It's not really their fault. Their life just explodes. So no matter how I teach, they're going to make D's and F's. What I'm really interested in here are the B and C students, right? And I was really interested in how can I move those B and C students up to make them A and B students. And that's what you see here with this flipped class. With a flipped class in red, right, what you see is more A students. What you see is more B students. So they're shifting that up. And so that was really interesting to me and really what I wanted to see in my classes. There's a lot of, people are reporting higher American Chemical Society exam scores. This is just an assessment tool from the American Chemical Society. Anecdotally, people were saying, hey, when I teach this way, I can catch misconceptions, more engagement, less boring. Kind of my goal here is for students not to fall asleep. So I was real excited about that. And happier students. I didn't want to do this if the students were going to be unhappy. And so this is another study that was done by different people. And unfortunately, the colors are flipped, right? So here, the flipped classroom is in blue, and here it's traditional. And it looks like this is emotional satisfaction in a post-test. This looks like the flipped students are happier than the traditional students. And it's really close. I just didn't want it to be way low, right? That was my goal. I didn't want the flip students to be angry, right? I don't enjoy angry students. So happier students was one of my goals as well. One of the things that I was worried about. Now there were several concerning things though I found about this when I was searching around. There was editorials by Norbert Pienta that are just worth a read, right? Faculty members are frustrated because students do not seem to want to read the book or view the videos before class. So he's talking about a flipped class. They don't want to do the work before, right? And they just want to, when they get to class, want to look up answers to the clicker questions or the online homework or assessments rather than struggle with the task. And then he says, insert your favorite reason, right? But that's just what they want to do. So faculty members get really frustrated. But I love this. Learning is really challenging. Learning is challenging. Learning something new is challenging. It's one of the things that I do to keep my teaching fresh is I try to learn new things so I can see how students feel when they're learning new things. And it can be really challenging. But he says, so is teaching, especially when you're actively trying to help students learn. If I just come up and lecture on the board, right, and they're just trying to write it down really fast, I'm never really interacting with them. So there's nothing that's challenging. But if they're working in groups and they are getting frustrated, that becomes challenging to me as a teacher, right? To help lead them through this, to help them not be as frustrated. So it is challenging. So he says he can make the brash claim that lecturing in general organic chemistry is easy. And I agree with that. But doing the things that make everyone in one's class learn is far more challenging. And I agree with that too. And he says, hey, look, if you want to embark on this path, you need to remind yourself of how students actually learn and that the activities need to promote conceptual knowledge. And I really want to point this out, that conceptual knowledge. If you don't tie your activities to your assessment in some way, the students will have no buy-in, right? And so as we think about developing these in-class activities, that was one of my goals. I wanted it to be really clear that if you do the activities in class, you will be more successful on the assessments, right? And so I thought that was, as I was trying to figure out what I wanted to do with active learning, that was really something I was thinking about. Here were some other kind of like the bad and the ugly, the fears that I had. It relied on student preparation. When you're relying on student preparation, sometimes students aren't going to do it if there's no check. So I needed to figure out a way to check. At the time, technology was really scary to me. I didn't know how to make a screencast. I didn't know how to make a video. I didn't know how to do any of it, right? And it's at 2020, and I was at home, right, with my dog and my cat and my kid and my husband, and I had to figure all of that out. So that was really scary for me at the time. When I talked to that gentleman in 2012, that conference was in August, and I said, oh, the flipped classroom, it sounds so amazing. And he goes, don't go back and do it this year. Don't do it. And I was like, oh, okay. Why? And he goes, it takes so much time. He was like, you really need a summer to plan, make your videos and make your classroom activities and walk in and have it done. He was like, you don't want to be doing it. And his suggestion actually, he goes, if you're not certain, try it at the end of a semester for a week and see how the students kind of like it, right? And I thought, well, that's an interesting thing, but I wasn't really interested in that because I was afraid it would just like really freak him out. But I thought that was an interesting suggestion. I was really worried about student perception and the time it takes students. And so there was a study in 2016 in the Journal of Chemical Education where it said, hey, look, how do students really like to learn? And it compared the control class, which is here in blue, with the flip class, which is here in red. Because I was trying to decide when I flipped my class, well, what do they really want to see? What do I really want to do in the class? I knew I wanted to use videos beforehand. And I knew I wanted them to have notes because I didn't want to give that up. So I felt like that was important. I'm a big right to learn person. But what do I want to do in the class? And so when I looked at this, and this is the mid-survey and the final survey, and the options are, I learn by myself, the teacher lectures and tells us what to learn, I work with others in the teacher lectures, or I work with others to understand the assignments. The first thing that jumped out to me is that they don't really like working with others only to understand the assignments, right? So that gave me a big pause here. What they did like though, was I work with others in the teacher lectures, right? So they still wanted some sort of component of a lecture. I was also very sensitive to one of the things that students say every so often, which is, I had to teach myself, right? And when students say that, I always like to dig around in that a little bit. I'm like, what do you mean you had to teach yourself? Well, the teacher just hands out packets, right? And I'm like, well, but I feel like you doing the things is where you actually learn. And maybe you're confusing, teaching yourself with studying. I don't know, right? But I was really cognizant of their perception because their perception is important. And so this is really where I landed because it gave the best score as far as satisfaction, right? They wanted a little bit of lecture, but they also wanted to work with others for a little bit. And so I wanted to kind of land here in my active learning journey. The same survey here is for the flipped classroom. They found it hard or appropriate. No one found it too hard, which I thought was really interesting. So this eased my mind a little bit when I thought about student perception, right? And so I was really happy with these results. So what I chose to do is I chose to take my traditional lecture, right, where we were lecturing, and then what's in blue here, they were doing at home. They were doing homework and extra practice problems. And instead, at home, they watch a video and notes before they come in, right? Then we do a Plicker review from the previous class. Then we do a bridge lecture on new material. And then we do an activity on new material. And they have extra practice problems. Then the next time they come in, they get to... Sorry. I'm afraid if I talk, I'll echo. Nope, no echo. Okay. So then when they come in, right, they get to review the material. So just kind of to think about this, right? I like scaffolding assignments. And so they see the new material in videos and notes. They get a bridge lecture on the new material. They do an activity on the new material. And then the next time when they come in, they review the material in their groups using Plickers. Okay, so we get to see this multiple times. If you're more of a visual person, right, they do a pre-class preparation, they have a bridge activity, in class active learning. So that's sort of what I was going for. So a really big key that's helped me be very successful is to be very organized. I, on the very first day, give all my students a schedule. So this is my fall schedule for Chem 1010. I have the day, and I have the videos they need to watch before they come in, okay? And so these are videos that I've done because I did not want the criticism of we're watching other people, right? And so these are my videos, and they watch those and they take notes. And so for accountability, what I do is I check their notes. Now, I found very early on that I could not just say, take notes on these videos, because some students would take one sentence and some students would take 10 pages, right? And so I needed to find a way for a couple things. One, I really wanted them to be able to put their notes with some images, right? Because I feel like images are important. I wanted us to use the notes as a reference in class. So I wanted to be able to say, hey, I need everybody to turn to page 32 in your notes, and let's look at this example together and use that to work this problem. And so the best way I found to do this was I post blank PowerPoints, right? And not blank, but there's some pictures and things like that. And then the students watch my videos. This is my YouTube channel. And so this is an example of what they would see on the video that they would be required to write on their notes, right? So anything that I write, they have to write. And when they come to my class for the check, I say, okay, everybody open your notes up to page 15, right? And I go through and I do a spot check, right? This takes approximately 2 minutes. It does not take a long time. If they don't have their notes, they can't stay. They can pop out, they can watch the screencast and come back in, but they can't stay. The way that I talk, because I think a lot of people have anxiety about this. So the way that I approach this with students is before I start my class, I do a pre-class survey, right? And I ask 5 questions, and I post it before class gets started. And I say things like, well, how do you learn best, right? But I also say, hey, you're gonna work in a group in this class. What do you like about working in a group? And what do you not like about working in a group? And on the very first day, I say, okay, we did a poll about what you didn't like on the first day. What do you think everybody answered? What do you think everybody answered?
People in the group that aren't prepared.
People in the group that aren't prepared, right? And so I said, the way that I can ensure that everybody has a basic level of being prepared is to check the notes, right? And this is a way I can ensure that you are working with people in your groups that are prepared, okay? They also don't like being graded on somebody else's work, right? That's another big one. And so that Plickers helps with that, because everybody goes and answers individually. So this is what they do before they come in, and that's sort of how I do some classroom management around it. So now what we're gonna do is active learning, right? And it would be kind of silly if I were to stand here and just talk to you about active learning without us doing active learning. So I check the notes, and then students will review using Plickr cards. And so I thought we would try them out, right? So I have Plickr cards here for you. Right? And these are the same cards that I hand to my students. You can see that's really helpful for me. I write their names on them, right? And so we go over in the very first class how to answer. So this is the way the Plickr card is, right? The way you hold it up is the letter that you answer. So there's a C here. If you hold it up, you're answering C. If you turn it this way, you're answering D. If you turn it this way, you're answering A, right? And so it's the way that you turn it. The big thing that most students mess up on is that they'll put their hand over the code like this. If it does that, you can't move it. So it won't read it. So you just have to tell them to move their hands, right? And I tell the students that on the first day. So when we come here to do Plickers, right? Plickers are a free program. They're capped at 63, but there's a colleague in my department who is using them in a larger class. He has set up 2 classes and uses different colors, so you can use them in a larger class. So when the students come in, right? I always kind of have a really fun question for them. And so this is up when they come in. And so they come in and they sit in their groups, and generally, right, there's some sort of like fun thing, right? This is their free point. They're there, they're on time, they have their notes. And what it does for me is it helps me make sure that the tech is working, right? So we're gonna go ahead and I'm gonna have you answer this. So are Crocs sandals? This is something that I argue with my son about a lot, okay? You don't do anything with your phone. All you do is hold up the card with A or B, holding it straight. Yep, there you go. Now, you see how the name on your card, you're named after famous scientists, right? So do you see how the name on your card turns blue? That's how you know that you have Plickered in. When you have Plickered in like this, right, if you change your mind, we can re-Plickr, we can rescan. So the students aren't set in what they do. So these 4 people are here. Immediately, I know who's absent, right? And I know who's there, and I can access this again. And so this is set up as a survey. There's no right or wrong answer. You can show the graph here. I love this because in my classes, I just asked this week, and in my classes, solidly 75% of them said no, right? I firmly sit in the yes, right? But 75% of them say they're not sandals. And so then a lot of times they're like, well, it's because sandals are this, and they classify them. And it's a super fun way to start kind of talking about like silly questions. Like at Halloween, I'll ask, oh, what's scarier, you know, clowns or spiders, you know? And so it's just kind of fun. So then after that, I say, okay, now we're going to review from the last class, right? And so maybe in the last class, we talked about when the first Nobel Prize was given, right? Okay. So what year was the first Nobel Prize given? Right. And so here, right? Did you want to rescan? You good?
No, no.
Okay. So here, right, I stopped it because everybody scanned in. And I have two options here. So in my class, I just can talk and show what's correct. It was 1901. I don't show a graph for these because if I show a graph for these, first off, students can feel bad if they're the only one that didn't get it. So I don't like to do that. The other thing is I show a graph and then choose to repoll. Students will just go to the one that has the most answers because they're like, well, the herd mentality, right? The herd must be right. So I just talk about which one is correct. Now, the only time that I will show the graph is if it's truly 50-50 in the class, because I'll show the graph and I'll say, oh man, 50-50, right? Let's think about this, and then you can repoll, okay? So you're not stuck with this here. I want to point out a few things. This is free. You give them the cards, it's free to you, and they're not using their phones, right? So there's no tech on their side, it's all cards. My son is when he was in elementary schools were using these, right? So it's very, very easy to use. A few things to point out, you can put images here, right? So then this is just an example. You can use images. So I talk about identifying functional groups. All right, so you can put images there. You can also put images here, right? So you can have images as the answers as well as here. So it's very versatile in the questions that you can make. If you were me, right, my question would be, well, what does the output look like, right? And so you can go to a score sheet, right? And if we go to engage, it will tell you what your class has done. And you can choose a percentage, or you can go in and you can choose a number, right? So like 1 out of 2 or 2 out of 2 or those types of things. So you get a really nice kind of score sheet here. On my side, as the instructor, what I see is this, right? So this is my engaged class. I'm in one of the big, I'm in 1006 in the science building, which is the really, really big room, because I know everybody's like, well, when you scan, can you really scan all the way to the back? Luke is sitting back here in the back, right? He scanned just fine. I put up a question that they would never be able to answer, right? One of my upper level questions. And I said, I just want you to answer randomly, because I wanted you all to see what it looks like when you get a mix. So I can see their names and I can see whether they got it right, it's a green light, or whether they got it red. And so this allows me to modify my lecture on the fly, right? So I ask a question and I go through and I scan, and there's a bunch of greens, we got it, right? We are good. I can go on to the next topic. If I go through and scan and I get a mix like this, then a lot of times what I'll do is I'll give some helpful hints. You know, I'll be like, well, if we think about, make sure you're thinking about this, you know, and students will be like, oh, because I'm trying really to get them to about 90% green. If I scan and everything's red, maybe they don't really get it, right? And so a lot of times if I scan and everybody's red, I'll be like, I'm just gonna put down my phone for a second and we're gonna talk through this problem, right? And then I rescan and they get basically a free point. But the point of that is that we're building trust, right? They need to know that I want them to do well. I say over and over, we're all in this together until you take the test, right? And so it allows me to address those misconceptions in real time. I also get really great questions because a student was like, hey, I don't really understand why it's not B. Can you explain that to me? So it gives me a really good jumping off point for students who don't really know what questions to ask. The other thing, sometimes I'll scan the whole thing and it'll be red and I'll be like, that's weird. And I realize I put in the wrong correct answer. So that's happened several times before too. So just kind of as an FYI there. Clickers are a fan favorite. Students really love them. I do a whole review day before every test with just clickers. And last year when it snowed and we kind of knew it was going to snow, I said, okay, if the university calls it off, and I'll let my students vote using their clickers. I said, would you rather do the new content on your own and keep our review day? Or would you rather me scrap the review day and then do the new content when we come back? And 95% of them voted keep that review day. We'll do the new content on our own, right? So they like clickers. It's like a game. They get really excited about it. So after we do a brief review with clickers, I do some sort of activity. I get activities from all sorts of places. I go to Teacher Pay Teachers. I really like doodle diagrams because they're generally very good visuals. This is where I'm doing my little bridge lecture, right? So I'm using some of these for bridge lectures. About half of these I have purchased. About half of them I've created. If you're doing a kind of an introductory class, I teach introductory chemistry. A lot of those topics already have doodle diagrams. But like once you get to organic chemistry, there's not a lot out there. So I created all of those. And some of them I just don't like and have gone on and created my own. So this is an example of one that I created that we'll talk through in the class because there was nothing out there that I really thought was very good for me, for my class. I'm sure it's very good for other classes. So please don't email me. The other thing that I really love to do are foldables. These are just pieces of paper that help students organize their thoughts. This is one of mine that I do for when we talk about VSPR in chemistry, which is some geometry. And this has been very successful. I had a student who stopped me last week and she took my intro class where we did this. And then she's gone on to Gen Chem 1 and Gen Chem 2, and now she's in organic. And she goes, do you remember that paper thing that we did with the flaps? And I said, yeah. She goes, that was the best thing ever. I still use it, right? And every so often, I'll catch a student that's got one when we haven't done it yet. And I'll be like, what you got there? And they're like, well, it's this thing my friend gave me. And I said, we're going to do that in this class. I'm the one that does that. And they were like, oh, so apparently they're passing it like a drug deal to each other. I don't know, right? But this is one of the ones that's a big fan favorite, right? Because it just helps them learn the material, helps them quiz themselves. And I've had a couple different iterations of it. I've got a different iteration that I'm going to use this year and try. But this was one of the original ones where they kind of opened it up this way, right? So we had flaps this way. This just helps them organize information. It helps show relationships. It's real inexpensive, right? It's a piece of paper. And so that's one of the things that I like to do. I also have one for titrations that I like. But other than that, what we use our group time for is to work some problems. I used to just hand these out and walk around and check the groups and have them explain it to each other. I found that didn't really work super great. There are a lot of ways you can do this. There are people who like assign roles where there's a communicator, so not only one person speaks. I had a really hard time enforcing that. I could not enforce like who was the communicator and who was the recorder, and they did. And so I tried it and I was like, I hate that. So I stopped. And so instead, what I really do is more of a think, share, but in their groups. So I'll say, okay, right now in your groups, I want everybody to balance this equation. Take 60 seconds, right? And they all balance. And then generally it's quiet. I said, now compare your answers and it should be noisy. And then they talk to each other, right? And then I go over it. And if they have problems, we'll go on over here. But I always go to the back of the packet too, because I want to do what they consider harder problems, because I don't want the complaint, and I didn't like this as a student, right? You do everything in class that's easy, and then you get home and you got to do the hard stuff. And so students consider this harder because you have to go from the words to the chemical formulas and then balance it. And so it helps, we kind of skip around and do things in our groups. I know that I teach in chemistry and it's super problem-based. I have taught some other upper level courses and they were very discussion-based. And I've taken some really discussion-based courses, particularly in education. One of my education professors used these books, Taking Sides. And this is what I did when I wanted to do discussions in an analytical chemistry course on environmental topics, because we were really interested in that. But there's lots of them, depending on, there's United States history, there's business ethics and society, psychology, crime and criminology, science, technology, and society. This is just a really lovely resource. And what I think and what I particularly like about this is for everyone there is learning outcomes, and they start with about a page and a half where they introduce the issue. It's very neutral. And then they have someone who's a yes and they have someone who's a no, right? And so you can read both, and there's some questions at the end for students. And then at the very, very end, there's this, it's critical thinking and reflection, and is there common ground? And I don't give that to students, right? I keep that for me because I want these to be my discussion questions when they get in there. So I like this. They show both issues, very neutral, show both issues, and then you've got some discussions there that you don't have to give to children, to the kids, students, to our scholars. There we go. I got there eventually. So that's another thing that's been really helpful. My advantages here, I started out with a really humble goal of no one falling asleep. Nobody falls asleep anymore. I like it. I also like that all the material's covered. I would get really anxious, right? If we went slower one day because students had questions or didn't quite get it. Now everything's on the screencast, right? We're doing the activities in class. So if I have a group that really doesn't understand something and needs time to review, I can take that time. I was teaching a class yesterday, and it was an Intro to Chemistry 2 class, and we were talking about intermolecular forces, which they should have had in Intro 1, and we were applying them, and it was really clear that nobody remembered it. Even the 3 students who had me for Intro 1, right? Nobody was making eye contact with me. So I'm not throwing any stones because it's been a while since they had done it. And so I was able to stop that whole class, right? And say, I feel like we just need to review this. And I was able to take the time to slowly go through it and give some examples and not feel panicked that we were falling behind. And that has helped me tremendously. The other thing that I do is at the very end, I ask one final clicker question to students. And that final clicker question is this. It takes me a second to swing back and forth between them. Right. I stayed the entire time and worked with my group. Yes, and don't choose this one, right? You have to give 2. And I tell them, this is your 10-point problem. All those clickers at the beginning, they're 1 point each. But if you stay and you work with your group, this is 10 points. It takes a lot of the anxiety about getting the right answer at the beginning away, right? It rewards students for working in their group without being graded on anybody else's work, right? And so it's really helpful. It also helps students, like, let's say a student crashes their car on the way in, right? And they're just running late. Everybody runs late. And they miss all those clicker points at the beginning. Some chemistry is better than no chemistry. So if they come, they still get their 10 points, right? And so I just really like this. The students really like it. And it also kind of helps me figure out who's around. My thoughts were great, but I like the student thoughts a lot better. So I've gotten these for my teaching evaluations ever since I've been doing this. And they like the groups, right? She puts us in groups a lot and it helped me learn the material. I typically hate group work, but this helped me with that a lot. The Plicker activities motivated us to work together and help one another learn. It was fun. I don't think I've ever had anybody describe my class before as fun until I started doing this. So I was really, really thrilled that they seem to be happy with it as well. I get very few negative comments about it, which has just been really, really nice. I know when we sit through these types of like new teaching things, sometimes it can be like overwhelming. And sometimes you're like, man, if I could just really see that, it would really help me a lot. If you ever want to see any of these, you are more than welcome to come to my class. I teach 3 classes, Monday, Wednesday, Friday at 8, Monday, Wednesday, Friday at 9:10, and Monday, Wednesday, Friday at 11:30 in these places. If you could email me beforehand, because maybe you're like, ooh, I'm not really interested in videos and activities, but those Plickers look awful fun. Because maybe the best time to come would be a review day where we do Plickers all day long. That would give you the best opportunity to see it. If you're like, I don't really want to do Plickers, but I'm really interested to see how you do the activities and stuff. Well, you don't want to come on a review day. And nobody wants to come on a test day unless you want to take a chemistry test, which I always have extras, so you're more than welcome to do. But if you ever want to come and observe, just shoot me an email and I'm super happy to do that. And right now I'll take any questions.
Well, I just want to say thank you, because I think that you have given us a lot of answers to the perennial question, how can I make active learning happen in a large course?
Yes. Yeah. So the Plicker course, the Plickers themselves go up to 60/30. That's where they max out. This professor may kill me for this, but Dr. Chusoy in the chemistry department has classes bigger, and he's doing it this semester, and he has put his groups into 2 classes. So he's just organized it here. And so he does it by color. So he'll say, if you have the white Plicker cards, answer now. If you have the yellow Plicker cards, answer now. And that has worked really seamlessly for him. So you can modify this for bigger classes too, which is really nice.
How long are your pre-lecture videos that the students watch before coming to the class?
Yeah, that's great. That's a great question. I try to keep them under 30 minutes for a 55-minute class. I am not always successful. I went through and did an analysis, and I hate that I threw it away because I did it and I threw it away for my chemistry and art class. And I had something along the lines of 20 videos that were under 15 minutes. And then I had, 20 that were within, 15 to 30. And then there were 3 days where they were over 55 minutes, right? And so I need to get those down. There are also some days, particularly in that class, where they don't have videos to watch because, I introduced something like significant figures and conversions in the same video, and I want 1 day of activities for significant figures and 1 day for conversions. So I hedge in that class a little bit and say, oh, but go back and look at all those days you didn't have any videos, and they laugh at me a lot with that. And then we go on, but I try really hard to keep it under 30 minutes because otherwise I get complaints that the videos were longer than the actual class. And so I'm trying to avoid that. I'm trying to give it because if you get too close, then they still complain and say it's longer, even if it's not. So I try really hard to keep it under 30. Yeah. Anybody from the Zoom world have any questions? No, pretty quiet. Well, thank you all for coming. I really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Your Zoom people say thank you, so.
Oh,